Hey everyone, welcome to the Exploratory Movement webinar. I wanted to make this as a quick introduction to some of these concepts before I launch my Exploratory Movement ebook, which is coming out tomorrow if you're watching this straight off the bat. And if you're watching this after the 11th of April, it's out now, so you can check the description and grab it if you're keen to have a look. But I just wanted this to be an introduction to some of these concepts and a bit of a taste on how you can use these ideas to produce better outcomes in the gym, better outcomes out of the gym, and just make better use of the time that you are spending warming up before you go to train. So the first thing I wanted to go through is just generally what is it? Because the term exploratory movement isn't something that's talked about or mentioned a lot. All exploratory movement is the movement preparation phase that's taken from my greater model of training. If you've seen some of my other content, you know that I like to break my training days and my training ideas up into exploratory, ballistic, and extended action. Exploratory movement is that first piece of building a day or a program. The idea behind it is using some more challenging and unique ways of moving to drive movement outcomes, get you ready for sessions, and build up general movement competence. We want to use these movements and these ideas under the general guideline that moving in lots of different ways is generally good. So why would integrating some of these ideas into your sessions have value? And it comes down to the fact that variability of movement is more than just a gimmick. A lot of people will speak through variability and just insert it into sessions for the sake of it. But we want to use some of these variable movement concepts to broaden the underlying movement capacity that we have, and then apply that laterally to other tasks or specialties that we may need to. As an industry and as coaches, we need to start moving away from viewing what movements that we're picking as to what can have the greatest carryover intra-session. We want to be making our choices based off what things are going to be able to complement our greater goal over the largest period of time. And this is generally where you see people and how you see people choosing warm up variations. They're expecting a specific warm up drill to directly correlate to an improved execution of that skill in a really short period of time. They're assuming that these low order skills are going to have that pull to improved execution. When in reality, the thing that's going to improve those outcomes over time is just building genuine capacity and then practicing your skill with that underlying base. Taking this approach pays respect to the fact that we need time to alter skill and alter structure. Without time, we don't really have a basis to manage or change much. There's going to be two major sides. You have these specific warm-up drills, as I said, and then the capacity building drills. The value behind those specific warm-up drills usually lies in the fact that they're a tool to exaggerate certain positions, to take an action and emphasize a specific part of it out of context, can definitely be used as a teaching tool, but you can't assume that understanding one of those pieces of a greater movement out of context is directly going to carry over and drive improvement when it's placed into the greater context of that movement. Whereas our capacity building drills are going to create unique ways for an athlete to move, output force, and manage stress, and this will then broaden the ways or the available ways that athlete has to achieve a specific task. We're banking on making them generally better movers and then giving them the time to apply that broader base to the skill set at hand. A few really easy examples of this between the specific or the capacity building exploratory drills that we're talking about in regards to something like a snatch is looking at a broomstick snatch versus a granny toss. Old mate on the left can do as many reps as he wants with that broomstick, but one, it's going to lack stimulus, and two, it's really going to lack the ability to progress it outside of just going to do more snatches. It's easy to forget that you get a lot of specific warm-up exposures just warming the skill up, and regardless of what you choose for your initial movement prep, you're not just going to jump straight to your working weight or straight to the highest intensity of output of the specific task you're going to do. You're going to work it up from whatever empty bar to whatever max load you're pushing. So why taking a step below that and loading something so minimally or so sub-maximally that it really just becomes a tool to move a little bit? And we're going to talk about what's going to create better warm-ups a little bit later, but something like a granny toss is going to have you hitting some relatively similar positions. It's going to have you producing force. It's going to be scalable, progressible, and it does tick better boxes as a movement prep option. Same thing for everyone's favorite bench press activation drill, the banded pull apart. Instead of saying, in this action, we want to retract the scapula and keep it tight back, we're going to just emulate that within the warm-ups. Try doing something like a kip swing, something that will integrate those stabilizers of the upper back. It's going to put you in different contexts with that overhead arm position, and it's still going to warm up and prepare those tissues for the task at hand. Instead of taking an isolated piece of an action and just doing that off in the corner, you're going to have more success integrating some different movements to really achieve the same task, but also bring up underlying qualities that you may not have in the past, provide you an opportunity to learn some new skills, and build up capacity in ways that you wouldn't have previously. The thing that you need to do before you start making any of these changes is getting your priorities straight. When we're looking at what actually creates a good warm up, we have to satisfy a couple of basic demands. One, we need a shift towards the mindset and physiological state of training. That means arousal is going to be increasing, core body temperature is going to go up, and your general mindset is going to shift towards, I'm ready to do some hard work. We're also going to want some changes in general tissue pliability. That comes along with the increased core body temperature, getting blood moving, getting things actually happening at the start of a session. And then we also want them to have some ability to grade that difficulty. The state that you're in going into any session is going to be different. So the ability to take these drills and grade them for a smoother introduction is a lot more useful than always starting at the most basic of pieces and warming up, even if you're feeling good. Now it's going to become a win-win situation if we can satisfy all of those requirements and bring up other aspects of fitness that will have stimulus and will have progression in their own right. We want to use drills that kind of do everything poorly, sparingly. For a lot of those basic or specific warm-up drills, you're going to find they don't really create that shift into the mindset of a physiological state of, I'm about to train hard. I know broomstick snatches don't get me raring and ready to train. They're going to be so low intensity that they don't have the ability to shift us into that state of being ready to train. So not only do they warm you up poorly, but they don't really offer anything extra on top of what you're doing them for. So with that being said, there's a few movement types which I believe fit into this category of exploratory movement really quite well, and that I think tick a lot of these boxes and allow a lot of flexibility in how you implement them. Some of the things that I looked for when compiling this list was, can it be done with little equipment? Is it scalable? Can you push to really high outputs depending on how you're feeling? And can it force you to enter common ranges in new ways, or force you to use the skills and abilities that you currently have to enter uncommon ranges? We're looking for its ability to challenge you in new ways, but also get you generally prepared for a session at hand. The buckets or movement types of gymnastics, isometrics, plyometrics, jumps, spinal hygiene, and throws were the 6 that really stood out to me when I was making this resource. To give you a quick spiel on each, gymnastics is probably one of the most useful tools within this bucket of exploratory movement because it does a lot of things really well. It's one of the best tools to help you enter more mechanically disadvantageous ranges, and those ranges are going to provide a lot of challenge to tissue, drive a lot of strength gain, and drive a lot of build towards proprioception. It's not often, especially as people get heavier and heavier, that they delve into these skill sets, which really lends them at a disservice because a lot of the positions that you can enter with these movements are ones that just aren't available with a barbell or a dumbbell in your hand. Jumps and plyometrics can also be a fantastic entry point to more explosive actions. You can play with entering different deep ranges at different speeds, all whilst working on becoming generally more elastic. And the variations and scalability of this movement type can really be changed infinitely. There's so many types of jumps and takeoffs that you can do. There's a lot of subcategories within plyometrics and jumps that in the larger resource are explained quite thoroughly. So if you want to learn a bit more about that, the ebook's going to be your best friend. As for the concept of spinal hygiene, spines are built to bend, twist, and move. I know a lot of prep is circled around making sure you're not moving, especially before moving into large, heavy compound lifts, but generally I find that the bracing practice and all those other bits and pieces that make you effective and stiff at moving heavy weights can be trained up and warmed up really well in the specific task itself. So instead of just spending more time in those initial stages of those warm-ups becoming stiffer and stiffer, Give the spine a chance to move, then layer on top of that mobility the strength and ability to create stiffness when needed. Using these different forms of flexion, extension, and rotation can go a long way to opening up movement options within the trunk, which end up creating a more resilient system. A system that can't move at all in any direction is generally pretty brittle, because even though it might be able to stay rigid in certain contexts and at certain times, you can't stay tight forever. At some point, you're going to move into one of these ranges that you may not have access to, so you probably want to have had some prior exposure to them in lots of different ways, be them loaded, unloaded, and into varied intensities and grades of the actual movement type itself. Isometrics, even though you're not moving, are one of my favorite ways to spike intensity early on, and it can also provide a really easy, low risk way to enter new, deeper ranges. We're going to have two types: overcoming and yielding. The more yielded variations definitely have a lower intensity. On the screen, you can see an overcoming variation. That's an overcoming calf raise isometric. All the overcoming means is you're trying to push through an immovable object. The tissue still isn't changing length, but you're really trying to make it. Yielding would be the opposite, say holding a dumbbell out in front of you. Both can be taken really close to failure, and because the tissue itself isn't moving, you do create stress, and that stress can produce some really good stimuli, but because you're not creating a massive amount of eccentric load, you're generally not going to get the soreness that comes along with it. So what you do get is a massive spike in intensity for very little fatigue cost, which makes a movement type like this really valuable when it comes down to starting of a session on the right foot. And then we have throws, and it's another great way to introduce more power and fast-paced movements into your session. You're going to hit a lot of the same positions that are required in produce of an explosive action, and out of all the variations previously mentioned, this is probably going to be the most enjoyable. There's something special about being able to murk something behind you or throw a ball into a wall. Again, the intensity of these variations can be quite high, and because you are producing a lot of force against very little resistance, you're going to force a lot of blood through the body. You're going to move through ranges with quite a lot of intent, which does wonders for preparing a system to do work. For some ways to express power, like sprinting or Olympic lifts, there is some barrier to entry when it comes to you need some skill to express them. Very little skill is required for these types of movements, which make them really, really valuable in getting them into a person's program as an introduction to these broader types of movement. To round us out, I just wanted to go through a small case study just to see how some of these ideas and concepts are placed in practice. So I stole these cells, or I call them exploratory movement cells. These are the first two warm-up exercises from my client's program. As a general bit of background around him, he's about 6 foot of general strength. He's integrating a lot of running and Olympic lifting into his program at the moment. So a lot of these pieces of movement prep are either preceding days where there's quite a lot of Olympic lifting volume, or are working on some of his weaker points when it comes towards the running stuff. Even if this prep isn't before a specific day of running, as I've said before, this slot is a fantastic place if you can satisfy those warm-up demands to work on these extra skills. So day one's going to be his main clean day. So I've chosen a hollow Zanetti press and a low ceiling leap. If you're unsure of what a Zanetti press is, it's essentially bringing up a upwards dumbbell fly holding a hollow position. If you want to see what it looks like, the video is in the ebook. These two variations come together really well to help him enter some deeper ranges with the low ceiling lateral leap, and can help warm up his front rack by encouraging some protraction through that Zanetti press. Both of these pieces are either working on accessing extra range or complementing the movement that he's about to do. Instead of, say, doing something like a heavy rack hold of a front rack to warm that position up, we can build some different capacity through these movements. On his second day, it's more of just a general full body day. And because the compound movements on this day aren't super intense, I'm pretty sure from memory this day starts with a dumbbell row, dumbbell press superset. I took the chance to insert some work that's going to help bring up one of his weaker points within his running, which is how his calves and lower limbs feel. So we've just gone with a diagonal skater bound, which is going to be a bit more of a yielded variation of a jump to help him learn how to manage and absorb force a little bit better, and then an overcoming calf raise iso to build some resilience in those lower limbs. Even though both of these pieces don't directly warm him up for the press and row superset that's going to come, he's going to do some warm-up sets with the specific movements that he's training, so his upper body's going to be ready, and the skater bounds and the calf raise are going to sufficiently spike intensity and get his body in the state ready to train. A lot of these movements don't have to exactly and specifically warm up the same tissues that you are going to be using in the work to come. Just getting general movement through the body will do that. As I said, You're going to do the specific task to a lower intensity before you start anyway. Day 3 is going to be a snatch day, so working a single arm active hang, 1 is going to help with some general grip work, and 2 is going to provide a lot more strength to that shoulder, upper back region, and again, be quite difficult to start a session off with. Then moving through to a wet deadlift, which is a bit of a weird trap bar jump variation, which is going to be a great expression of power and get him hitting some of the same positions that he will in his snatch. One of the biggest holes or problems with his snatch is his ability to create more force in that second pull. So that wet deadlift is going to help build some of those underlying qualities in different contexts to provide a benefit later down the road to that movement. And day 4 is another general upper body day, working on very similar themes. A hip flexor raise is in there to create a bit more space at the front of his hip. He has had some back issues in the past, and we did boil it down to needing some more movement options at the hip and hip flexors and all that jazz. So using this variation will provide a lot of space and a lot of length through the front, which is something that we have been chasing, and then a pickup hop with a very similar rationale as the calf iso to build some resilience through the lower limb. Even though, again, it might not be specifically tailored to the training day at hand, we're treating the warm up as part of his training. So we're doing a lot of productive work here that's then complementing some of our larger skill sets or some of our larger goals. So hopefully that showed how you can implement some of these things in a pretty clear and practical way. If you're watching this first off from the email, the live link won't be up and ready yet. That's launching on Friday. If you're watching this after the fact, check in the description for a link to the Exploratory Movement ebook. It fleshes out all of these concepts in much greater depth and gives you access to a really substantial exercise library full of cues, full of videos and examples on how to integrate some of these ideas and concepts into your own training and level up your movement prep. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll see you next time.